3 locations around Moscow have just appeared in a claim that raises serious questions about the defensive layer around Russia's capital. Putilkovo, Komunarka, and Domodedovo. No tanks have entered the outskirts of Moscow. No major ground battle has erupted. But according to the Atesh partisan movement, communication towers in these areas were sabotaged, and they were reportedly linked to Russia's air defense network and electronic warfare system. If this claim is accurate, Moscow did not just lose a few pieces of equipment. Russia may be facing a much bigger problem. An air defense system that sees targets later, reacts more slowly, and leaves gaps exposed at the same moment Ukraine is expanding long-range drone strikes into Russia's rear. In that same picture, airports around Moscow have already faced temporary restrictions, oil refineries have been targeted, logistics facilities have come under threat, and communication systems deep inside Russian territory have also become targets. So what does the alleged sabotage near Moscow really show? Why could small communication towers create a major problem for Russian air defense? And how is Ukraine pulling the war back into Russia's rear? Let's find out with Military Force. A communication tower can look ordinary from the ground, but near Moscow it may belong to something far more sensitive. That is why the latest claim from the Atesh partisan movement matters beyond the physical damage it describes. The group says its operatives sabotaged several communication towers in the Moscow region, including sites around Putilkovo, Komunarka, and Domodedovo. These locations sit near the capital of a country that has spent years building layered protection around its most important political center. According to Atesh, the damaged towers were linked to equipment that supported Russia's air defense and electronic warfare network. The group said these sites helped monitor low-flying targets, transmit operational data, and coordinate between nearby defensive units. If that account is accurate, the target was not simply metal, cables, and antennas. It was a small part of the system that helps Moscow see a threat, understand it, and react before it gets closer. Modern defense does not work as one weapon acting alone. It works as a chain of sensors, signals, command posts, and crews. When one link is hit, the damage may not look dramatic at first, but the effect can spread through the whole process. This is why communication infrastructure matters so much in modern warfare. A missile launcher may be the visible part of the shield, but the hidden part is the flow of data behind it. A radar may detect movement, a sensor may confirm the track, and a command center may pass the warning to the unit that can respond. Each step depends on speed, clarity, and trust in the information being received. If that flow is interrupted, even a strong defensive system can lose tempo. It may still have weapons, it may still have trained crews. But if the warning comes late, the decision window becomes smaller, and the defenders have less time to identify what is approaching. For Moscow, that kind of delay carries political weight as well as military risk. The capital region is not just another military zone. It is the center of Russian power, and any weakness near that area can create a larger psychological effect. The claim still needs caution. Atesh has presented the operation as successful, but the full scale of the disruption has not been independently verified. That matters, because wartime information often moves faster than confirmed evidence. Still, the strategic meaning is clear. The alleged sabotage points to a war where the most important targets are not always tanks, trenches, or aircraft. Sometimes they are the quiet nodes that connect detection to action. The next question is even more dangerous. What happens when those nodes are watching targets that are small, slow, and flying low? The danger around Moscow begins with a simple problem. Low-flying targets are hard to see, and late detection can turn a strong defense into a rush defense. According to Atesh, the reported sabotage near Moscow may have affected systems used to detect low-flying objects and help air defense units coordinate their response. That claim still needs caution, because the full scale of the disruption has not been independently verified. Yet the military logic is clear. A long-range drone does not need the speed of a missile to create pressure. It only needs enough fuel, a planned route, and a gap in the network watching the sky. In that kind of fight, distance protects less than timing, and timing depends on information. Low-altitude flight changes the battle because the ground itself becomes part of the attack route. A drone can move below the cleanest radar picture, pass near forests, buildings, rivers, and uneven terrain, then force defenders to separate a real target from background noise. This does not make the drone invisible, but it can make the warning arrive late. For an air defense crew, the first alert is only the beginning. A track must be found, checked, shared, and then assigned to the unit that can respond. If communication slows at any point, the drone keeps moving while the defense is still building its picture. That delay is the real danger. A few minutes may sound small, but even a slow drone can cover important distance during that window. If the target is already near a protected zone, commanders may have to choose between firing quickly, waiting for clearer data, or moving systems into emergency mode. Around Moscow, this problem carries a meaning that goes beyond military procedure. The capital region is the political center of Russia, the seat of state power, and one of the most heavily protected areas in the country. That is why any weakness near this area can create a wider psychological effect. People may not see the full air defense network, but they can see airport delays, flight restrictions, alerts, and official reports about intercepted drones. Those signs bring the war closer to civilian life, even when the damage is limited. In recent months, Russian officials have repeatedly reported drone activity near Moscow, and airports around the capital have faced temporary restrictions during alerts. Those restrictions are safety measures, but they also show how long-range drones can interrupt the rhythm of a major city. For the Kremlin, the image is uncomfortable. Moscow is supposed to represent control, distance, and protection. When the capital must react again and again, the message changes. Even successful interceptions can still show that the system is under pressure. Defense may be working, but it is being forced to work more often. This is why the low-flying drone problem matters so much for the next stage of the war. Russia still has a large air defense network, trained crews, electronic warfare systems, and several layers of protection around key regions. The issue is not whether Moscow is defenseless. The issue is how much strain repeated alerts can create when small targets keep testing different routes. Every warning forces communication. Every temporary airport restriction creates public visibility. Every response requires attention from systems that Russia may also need elsewhere. For Ukraine, that pressure has value even when the physical damage is limited. It forces Russia to watch its rear more closely, protect more sites, and spend more time reacting inside its own territory. When airports, air defense units, and the outer edges of Moscow all have to respond, the story stops being about one alleged act of sabotage. It becomes part of a wider pattern. Ukraine is pushing the war deeper into Russia, one route, one alert, and one vulnerability at a time. That pattern prepares the ground for a strategy of strikes beyond the front. Ukraine's strategy is moving beyond the trenches because Russia's war machine depends on systems far behind the front. Kyiv is increasingly striking the rear network that keeps Russian forces supplied, repaired, fueled, and connected. The targets include oil refineries, storage depots, military industry, transport routes, air defense sites, and communication nodes. This does not mean Ukraine has stopped fighting on the front line. It means the front line is now connected to factories, rail yards, fuel tanks, and command networks hundreds of kilometers away. In a mechanized war, a soldier in a trench depends on diesel, ammunition, spare parts, radios, engineers, and trucks. If those links are weakened, the pressure felt at the front can become slower, thinner, and harder to sustain. That is why deep strikes have become a central part of Kyiv's wider approach, not a side campaign or symbolic reply to Russian attacks at home. Oil refineries are among the most important targets because fuel is the blood of a modern army. Tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery tractors, logistics trucks, generators, and aircraft all depend on a steady supply chain. If a refinery is damaged, the effect is not only the fire seen on video. Repairs take time, reserves must be moved, routes must be changed, and security must be increased around similar facilities. Even a temporary disruption can force planners to make new choices about where fuel should go first. Military needs may compete with civilian demand, export plans, and emergency stocks. This is why strikes on energy infrastructure can create pressure far beyond one location. They do not always stop an offensive immediately, but they can raise the cost of keeping that offensive alive. Over time, cost becomes strategy, especially when attacks come often enough to disturb planning cycles and force repeated adjustments. The strike on Syzran shows how far this campaign is reaching. The refinery in Russia's Samara region sits hundreds of kilometers from Ukraine, yet it has still been reported as a target of Ukrainian drones. That distance matters because it changes the map of risk for Russia. Rear areas once treated as relatively safe now require more guards, more air defense coverage, more electronic warfare, and faster repair teams. Every new protected site creates another demand on Russian resources. Moscow cannot defend every refinery, depot, factory, rail junction, and military site with the same density of protection. When Ukraine forces Russia to spread those defenses, it also forces a choice. Protect the front, protect the capital, protect the energy system, or accept gaps somewhere else in the network. This choice becomes harder as the list of threatened locations expands across regions that once felt removed from the battlefield entirely. The deeper aim of this strategy is not only to produce explosions. It is to make Russia spend more time defending, repairing, moving, and reorganizing. A damaged depot may interrupt deliveries. A hit factory may slow replacement parts. A disrupted command link may delay coordination between rear units and frontline formations. Each incident may look limited by itself, but together they create a wider burden. This is how Ukraine can pressure a larger opponent without launching a major ground operation every time. It attacks the systems that allow Russia to continue attacking. The effect is gradual, but gradual pressure can still shape operational choices and force commanders to plan around uncertainty under constant strain in the coming phase ahead. But deep strikes are not the whole story. If Atash's claims are accurate, some of that pressure may also come from inside Russia itself, through sabotage aimed at the command and coordination network. Atash's claimed operation in Sverdlovsk points to another vulnerable layer of Russia's war system: military communication behind the front. The Moscow case focused on the defensive network around the capital, but the reported Sverdlovsk sabotage reaches into a different function. According to Atash, its agents damaged a military communication facility in Sverdlovsk region, linked to secure data channels and rear coordination. The group said the disruption affected systems connected to the central military district and complicated the movement of troops and equipment toward the Pokrovsk direction. This claim needs caution because the operational effect has not been independently verified. Still, the target category matters because it shows how Ukraine and partisan networks view the Russian rear. They are not only looking at roads, railways, fuel depots, or warehouses. They are also looking at channels that turn resources into action. Modern armies do not move only through vehicles. They move through orders, signals, route updates, unit reports, and command decisions. A convoy can have fuel, trucks, armor, and soldiers. But if headquarters cannot pass instructions on time, the movement becomes slower and less reliable. A reserve unit may be ready to deploy, but it still needs a route, a schedule, a receiving command, and a clear picture of what is happening near the front. That is why communication infrastructure has military value beyond its physical size. It connects rear bases to active sectors, and it allows commanders to turn stored power into combat power. When that link is disturbed, the result may not appear as a destroyed tank or a burning depot. It may appear as delayed movement, confused coordination, slower replacement of losses, or uncertainty about where a unit should go next. The Sverdlovsk case matters because of its link to the Donetsk front. Atash claimed the damaged node helped coordinate Russian deployments toward Pokrovsk. If true, This would show that pressure on the front can be shaped far from the line of contact. A battle near Donetsk may depend on a communication cabinet, a relay station, or a command channel deep inside Russia, because modern operations require constant links between assembly areas, supply bases, transport planners, and field commands. This also explains why sabotage and drone strikes can support each other without being the same tool. Drone attacks can hit visible infrastructure, such as refineries, depots, or air defense sites. Sabotage can target quieter parts of the system, including local communication points and control channels. One creates visible damage. The other can create friction inside the process that moves orders and supplies toward an active sector. For Russia, the danger is not that one damaged site stops the whole army. The danger is accumulation. One disruption may be manageable. Several disruptions across different regions can force more security, repairs, checks, and time spent protecting the rear. Each extra measure consumes manpower and attention needed elsewhere. For Ukraine, the political message is clear. The war is not limited to trenches and towns in Donetsk. It is reaching structures that allow Russia to command, reinforce, and sustain the fight. From communication towers near Moscow to military nodes in Sverdlovsk, Kyiv wants to show that the rear is no longer separate from the battlefield. That message leads into a wider political question. Can Russia still keep the war outside its own borders? Zelensky's message about strikes around Moscow is aimed at a larger audience than the Russian military. For Kyiv, the point is not only whether one drone reaches a target or one facility suffers damage. The point is that the war is beginning to touch the territory Russia has tried to keep distant from the front. When Ukrainian strikes appear around Moscow, the meaning becomes political as well as military. It challenges the idea that Russia can attack Ukrainian cities while keeping its own centers of power insulated from the same conflict. Moscow region carries special weight because it is more than a geographic area. It is the seat of Russian political authority, the place where state power is displayed, and one of the most heavily defended regions in the country. Russian officials have placed major air defense assets around the capital, and that protection is meant to show control. When drones still force alerts, interceptions, or airport restrictions, the image of control becomes more complicated. For viewers outside the region, this is why the issue matters beyond one city. The battle is about confidence, deterrence, and the limits of protection under sustained pressure from above. This is why Zelensky has used strikes near Moscow to underline a broader claim. Distance no longer guarantees safety. Ukraine wants its partners, its own public, and Russia's leadership to see that long-range capability can change the psychological map of the war. A target more than 500 kilometers away may not decide the war alone, but it can change how leaders calculate risk. The pressure also creates a practical dilemma for Moscow. If Russia strengthens air defense around the capital, it must decide where those systems, crews, radars, and electronic warfare tools come from. The front line still needs protection. Crimea still needs protection. Air bases, rail routes, depots, and industrial sites also need protection. No state can guard every important location with the same density at the same time. That is where deep strikes change the cost of the war. They do not have to destroy Russia's entire military network to matter. They only need to force more movement, more security, more repairs, and more defensive planning. Each added requirement takes attention from commanders and resources from other missions. At the same time, these attacks shape public perception inside Russia. A drone alert near the capital is not the same as a battle in Donetsk. It is closer, more visible, and harder to separate from daily life. Even when damage is limited, the warning itself can show that the rear is no longer fully calm. Still, this should not be overstated. Deep strikes do not automatically create victory, and Russia still has a large defense system. Their real power is cumulative. They change the burden on Moscow, stretch the protective network, and raise the political cost of continuing the war. But this political message is only one layer. The next layer reaches deeper, into the economic system that keeps Russia's war machine supplied. Ukraine's long-range attacks are now aimed at more than military targets. They are designed to create pressure across Russia's rear, where fuel, transport, industry, air defense, and public confidence all connect to the war effort. The military effect begins with movement. A modern army needs fuel to move tanks, trucks, artillery systems, engineering vehicles, and aircraft. When a refinery, storage site, or transport route is hit, the damage may not stop an offensive in one day, but it can force repairs, rerouting, emergency planning, and tighter protection around similar facilities. That slows the system that keeps Russian units supplied. The economic effect is just as important. Energy is not only a battlefield resource for Russia. It is also a major part of state income, industrial activity, and domestic stability. When refineries burn or reduce output, Moscow must deal with repair costs, supply problems, and pressure on fuel markets. Even limited disruption can become more serious if strikes happen repeatedly across different regions. This is why deep attacks matter even when the visible damage looks local. The political effect comes from visibility. A drone alert near a large city, a temporary airport restriction, or a fire at an energy facility sends a message to people far from the trenches. It shows that the war is no longer something happening only in occupied territory or along the Ukrainian front. It is becoming visible inside the Russian rear, and that can weaken the sense of distance that Moscow has tried to maintain. The strategic effect is the hardest problem for Russia. Every threatened site needs some level of protection. Moscow, refineries, air bases, rail hubs, depots, and command centers cannot all receive the same density of radar, electronic warfare, panzer systems, security units, and repair crews. If Russia moves more protection to one region, another region may become thinner. That is why Ukraine's long-range campaign matters, even when individual strikes do not produce dramatic results. The goal is to force Russia to defend more places, spend more resources, and react more often. Over time, that can stretch the rear network that supports operations at the front. This leads to the larger conclusion of the war today. The battlefield no longer ends at the trench line. It now reaches into logistics, energy, communications, air defense, and the psychology of the rear. Modern war is becoming a contest over systems, not only territory. The alleged sabotage near Moscow shows how modern war is no longer confined to trenches, cities, or armored battles. A communication tower, an electronic warfare module, a data link, or a temporary airport restriction can now become part of the wider battlefield. Ukraine is combining different forms of pressure, from sabotage against communication infrastructure to long-range drone strikes against refineries, industry, logistics, and air defense. These actions should not be described as a single decisive blow. Russia still has a large military, deep territory, and serious defensive capacity. But the real effect is slower and more strategic. Each strike forces Moscow to defend more sites, move more resources, repair more damage, and accept more uncertainty behind the front. If this pattern continues, Russia may face a harder choice: protect the capital, protect energy, protect air bases, or protect the troops at the front, while another weak point appears elsewhere. If this analysis helped you understand the battle and the wider cost of modern war, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Military Force. This channel studies war not to glorify destruction, but to understand how weapons, strategy, and political decisions shape the lives of real people. Tell us in the comments what you think will happen next, and why peace becomes harder but more important when the battlefield keeps expanding.